cost, right? Security, protection. But are the people hooked? Well, it's during this time period that an open propaganda push is made to convince the Japanese people that darn right we're hooked, and not just us, you're hooked. Because we have this thing, a lifeline in Manchuria that connects us to the Eurasian population and, sends raw materials and goods and stuff back to Japan that keeps us all alive. Well, the question about whether or not Japan really needs Manchuria is an interesting one. Historian Sandra Wilson, in her book, The Manchurian Crisis in Japanese Society, 1931 to 1933, points out that the whole idea of Manchuria as this vital lifeline is part of the propaganda of the Japanese state. The stuff it's using to justify whatever's required to keep using Manchuria, using the equivalent of the idea that we're hooked.
That's
She
pretty
writes,
cool,
quote,
though.
the principle
Gliding
that
like that.
Japan was dependent upon access to the resources of Manchuria for survival as a nation was part of an attempt to create a narrative justifying Japan's claim to the region, and was closely linked with the assertion that Manchuria rightfully belonged to the Japanese, despite China's technical sovereignty over it. End quote. She then goes on to describe this phrase that was in use, and she points out that it had, instead of a dry sort of diplomatic tone, it referred to sort of the idea of what Japan has already paid in blood and sacrifice and investment for this territory. It's what we talked about earlier. Certain things attract you to the region, then certain things keep you there. She writes, quote, far from being a dry diplomatic term, Kaniki in the early 1930s was rather, as Murakami Hyoe has pointed out, a vivid word, suggesting sacrifice and the shedding of blood, and it relied for its effect upon a certain view of history in which the Sino-Japanese and Russo-Japanese wars figured prominently. Manchuria, she writes, was frequently referred to as the place where the spirits of 200,000 Japanese war heroes slept. The importance of the South Manchurian Railway and the large amount of Japanese public money which had contributed through the railway to the development of Manchuria were also evoked as evidence of Japan's right freely to exploit the Manchurian resources. End quote. Citing the sacrifices of 200,000 war dead would be, I would think, a pretty effective tactic
What
in most countries.
what do you do when somebody tries to shoot you down with a missile?
In the patriotic era, we're talking about even more effective. In the uber-patriotic Japan, even more effective than that. But if you happen to be an investor, for example, in the South Manchurian Railway, you have every reason, right around the same time period that this warlord's done away with, to worry about your investments, because events in China are starting to get to a point where it's conceivable to see somebody unifying it in the not too distant
Well, how many
future.
times has that happened
What's
to
going
you?
to happen if that occurs? Remember, everybody's been taking advantage of China during this preceding period here because it's been down. But what if it gets up? I mean, this is the sleeping giant of the world, the largest population on the planet. When it's
Right.
all put together, it's a landmass the size
I
of
was
the
able
United
to do it
States.
in a
And the
hummingbird
Japanese have been
a
taking
little bit,
advantage of
and
this
then they
situation
just
while the
shot a whole
Chinese
bunch
are
of them,
weak and
so I
currently
couldn't
occupy
dodge them all.
places the Chinese considered theirs. What's going to happen if all of a sudden somebody puts Humpty Dumpty back together again here? They all have 500 million people. The Japanese have 70 million. How do the long-term trends here look? I mean, you can see a positive possible outcome if you are the people, who want to keep this lifeline to Japan open. You want to keep this, addiction. You can make it work, but it means you've got to either keep China perpetually divided or split it up permanently, or you've got to take it over, or you've got to control it in such a way that you will never lose control of it, but you get to tell it what to do. You can't have a powerful, independent China, though, because obviously that's going to get messy when they want their stuff back. The other, of course, policy approach you could take is the one that those more liberal people in Japan are. Let's have this cooperative Asian relationship with China, where if Japan and China, with their population and resources and our high-tech, nose to the grindstone fanatical work ethic. I mean, we can do anything.